450 seats and counting. That's what Reform UK gained in yesterday's local elections, with results still trickling in from councils across England. They took Essex, they took Suffolk, they took Havering, they won Newcastle-under-Lyme from the Conservatives. Labour lost over 300 seats, including in the northern Heartlands that the party has held for generations. And yet, if you watched the BBC's coverage, which, by the way, I addressed in yesterday's video, you'd have come away thinking this was a bad night for Labour, with some interesting results on the margins. It wasn't. This was a political earthquake, and I'm going to tell you what it actually means, including the one thing that Reform's critics are too smug to admit, and the one thing that Reform's supporters are too excited to notice. Let's put this in context, because the numbers only make sense when you know where Reform started. In the 2024 general election, Reform UK won 5 seats in Parliament. 5. They got 14% of the national vote, more than the Liberal Democrats, and walked away with 5 MPs, because our electoral system is a rigged game that punishes new parties. The Liberal Democrats got 12% of the vote and won 71 seats. So the frustration was already there. The voters were already there. The only question was whether Reform could build the local infrastructure to actually go and get them. Yesterday was the answer. They went from virtually 0 local councillors to hundreds overnight. They took control of county councils in Essex and Suffolk, areas that had been Conservative for decades. They flipped Labour Heartlands in the north that have returned Labour councillors since before some of those voters were born. Nigel Farage stood in Havering, East London, and said Reform is now the most national of all parties. Irritating as that man is to many people, on the raw evidence of this election, he's not wrong. Reform competed in over 95% of wards across England. They are no longer a protest party that shows up in a handful of seats. They are a nationwide political operation. That is new. That is genuinely new. Here's what the political class, Labour, Conservative and media alike, have been quietly hoping for years. They've been hoping that Reform's support is soft, that it's a protest vote, that when the voters get into the booth, they'll come to their senses and vote for one of the two serious parties. Yesterday should bury that theory. This wasn't a fringe result. This wasn't a few disgruntled voters in leave-voting towns ticking a box to send a message. This was a coordinated nationwide surge across urban and rural England, in the north and the south, in Heartland Labour seats and Heartland Conservative seats. The man who lost his Hartlepool council seat to Reform, his wife was a Labour councillor whose seat also went to Farage's party. He came out and publicly called for Keir Starmer to resign. That's a Labour MP talking about his own wife's seat, calling for his own party leader to go. That's not protest, that's collapse. And the Conservatives, don't let Kemi Badenoch's defiant press conference fool you. They lost Hampshire, they lost Essex, which they had held for 2 decades. They are being squeezed from the right by Reform and from the south by the Liberal Democrats simultaneously. Badenoch said it was the beginning, not the end. Every party leader who's ever lost badly says something like that. It means nothing. The two-party system that has defined British politics since the Second World War is fracturing in real time, and Reform is the primary beneficiary. Now, here's the part that's going to annoy some people, but you came here for honest analysis, not cheerleading. Local elections are not general elections, and that distinction matters enormously. Reform just won hundreds of local seats. They control Essex and Suffolk. Great. What they don't have is a path to Westminster power as clear as their supporters currently believe. Here's the maths problem. In the 2024 general election, Reform won 14% of the national vote and got 5 MPs. If they repeat that performance in 2029, even if they increase it to 25%, 27%, 30%, they will still face the same fundamental problem. Our first-past-the-post system punishes parties whose vote is spread evenly across the country, rather than concentrated in specific seats. Labour won a majority of 170 seats in 2024 with 34% of the vote. Reform won 14% and got 5 seats. That's not a fluke. That's the system working exactly as designed to preserve the two-party duopoly. Now, and this is where it gets genuinely interesting, there is a scenario where reform breaks through. It's not impossible. If Labour's collapse is deep enough, and if Reform's vote becomes concentrated in enough constituencies rather than spread thin, the maths can shift. Prediction markets are already giving Reform roughly a coin-flip chance of winning the next general election, which, if you'd told anyone that in 2023, they'd have laughed at you. But coin flip means it could easily go the other way, and a party that gets 30% of the vote, comes second in 200 constituencies, and wins 30 seats is still not in government. They've just repeated what they did in 2024, at much greater scale and expense. The path to power runs through electoral reform or through a collapse of one of the two main parties so complete that FPTP can no longer protect them. Yesterday's results suggest the second option is more plausible than it's ever been, but plausible is not certain. Keir Starmer stood up yesterday and said he takes responsibility, he won't step down, and the party needs to keep delivering. The usual script. He won't survive to lead Labour into the next general election, that's my honest assessment. The party knows it, the MPs know it. The fact that a backbencher whose wife lost her council seat was publicly calling for a leadership timeline within hours of the result, that's not a one-off. That's the beginning of a conversation that's going to happen louder and louder over the next 12 months. Labour's problem isn't Starmer as a personality, though he has the charisma of a damp planning application. Labour's problem is that Labour won the 2024 general election on the back of Conservative collapse, not on the back of genuine enthusiasm, and it's since governed in a way that managed to disappoint almost everyone almost immediately. The cost of living didn't improve. Public services didn't visibly improve. The promised change felt like a change of letterhead, and Reform has been there, waiting, offering voters somewhere to go. Whoever replaces Starmer, and they will replace him, faces the same underlying problem. The voters who've left Labour aren't looking for a slightly different version of Labour. Some of them have gone left to the Greens. A lot of them have gone right to Reform. A new Labour leader doesn't automatically win them back. The next general election has to happen by January 2030. That gives Reform roughly 3.5 years to either consolidate this moment into something that translates to Westminster seats or to prove that they can win councils but not government. History suggests a few things here. First, parties that surge at local level don't automatically translate that to parliamentary success. UKIP was winning council seats for years before it won one MP, who immediately defected back to the Conservatives. But Reform is not UKIP. UKIP never broke through in Labour seats. Reform just did, comprehensively. UKIP never ran candidates in 95% of wards nationally. Reform did yesterday. The more relevant comparison might be the Liberal Democrats in the early 2000s, a party that built local government presence systematically, year after year, until they had enough concentrated support in enough constituencies to win meaningful Westminster representation. The Lib Dems peaked at 62 seats. Reform, with stronger national polling and a more polarised electorate, could potentially do better than that. Could, not will. What yesterday did do, without question, is make Reform impossible to ignore. Any party, any journalist, any commentator who dismisses them as a protest movement from this point forward is either lying or deluded. Farage has spent 30 years being told he'd never change British politics. He's changed it, slowly, messily, with a lot of embarrassing candidates and a lot of media ridicule, but he's changed it. The question now is whether changing British politics turns into governing Britain, and that is a much harder thing to do. So here's where we are. Reform won a historic number of seats yesterday. Labour is in freefall, the Conservatives are being squeezed out of existence, and the British political landscape looks genuinely different today than it did 48 hours ago. Whether that means reform in Downing Street, I'm not going to tell you that's inevitable because it isn't. I'm not going to tell you it's impossible because that's clearly wrong too. What I will tell you is that anyone who claims to know exactly how this plays out is selling you certainty they don't have. British politics just became dramatically more unpredictable, and the only honest thing to do is say so.
If you want the analysis without the spin, this is the channel for it.